Aloha and welcome to the Boy Mom Podcast with my mom, Monica Swanson. On the Boy Mom Podcast, it is our goal to bring you practical advice and biblical wisdom for raising boys in this sometimes crazy world. You can always find show notes over at monicaswanson.com/podcasts. We're so glad you're here.
David and James, as much as they love each other, will never have a typical sibling relationship. And so David can look at his friends and say, man, I wish I had a brother I could fight with even, or anything like that. And so the families who draw him in and who include him are such a blessing to us, even if it's something like we can't go to the movie as a family. And so if there's a new movie out that all the boys his age want to see, if a family calls him up and says, hey, David, do you want to come with us? That's a huge blessing.
Hey friends, I am so excited to share this episode with you. I can't imagine a more important topic for us to all talk about. I'm talking to my friend Sandra Peoples, and Sandra has two sons, one with autism. She was also raised with a sister with Down syndrome. So Sandra's pretty much an expert in all things special needs children, family dynamics, and anything related to that. She works with churches to help them be more accessible and helpful to families with special needs, and she is absolutely full of grace. Before we ever got on, I confessed to Sandra that this is a topic I'm not great at talking about. I don't even have the right language. I get awkward. And that's really why I wanted to bring her on, because I want to break through the awkward. And I want all of us to be able to be better friends to those people out there who have special needs kids. So I asked Sandra straight out, give us some help. Talk to us about the things we can do to be better friends to our friends with special needs kids. And this is so important. I wrote a blog post on this topic a few years ago. I'll link to it in the show notes, but I have a nephew with muscular dystrophy, and because of that, I have such a sensitivity and a heart for anyone raising a child with special needs, and I want to be there to support them. I just want to do it the right way. The other thing I wanted to talk about is for those with a special needs child, but other children as well, how we can best support the typical children in that family, how we on the outside might be able to support these kids, what kind of things we can do to be a good friend to the whole family. So Sandra does an amazing job of giving us some really practical ways we can do this. She's so gracious, she understands, and she's just wonderful. So I think you're going to get a ton out of this. Now, before I hop into our conversation, I want to just thank you again for your ratings and reviews over on Apple Podcasts and wherever you listen. I read everyone and I get so much encouragement. But today I'm going to read one from Jess and Scott. And I wish that there was like a reply button where I could respond and just say thank you. But Jess and Scott, I'm sending you a virtual hug for this. She titled it Can't Get Enough, gave me 5 stars. And this is what she said. This is hands down one of my favorite podcasts. As a mom of 2 teenage boys and an elementary age girl, I've received so many tips for raising them from Monica and her guests. I feel like she's a friend who recorded these just for me. Monica has such a big heart and a way of communicating that makes you feel like she knows the struggles we endure as parents and spouses. The most encouraging part is that she has a big faith, and the wisdom she shares comes from the Lord. If you're going to take advice, you want it to come from someone who seeks it from above first before giving it out. I'm such a fan, and I'm grateful for her calling. This is a must-add for all parents. Wow, that makes me feel so happy. That is everything my heart desires for this podcast to be. So thank you so much for that review. I really appreciate it. And if you haven't left one yet, guys, you can just hit pause, scroll down to the bottom on your phone of this podcast. You're going to see 5 stars. Just tap on them. And then if you want to leave a few words, you are welcome to do that. So thank you for that. And I'm also going to just thank this episode's sponsor, which is Wonder Crate, and I'm really excited about Wonder Crate. We just discovered it. Levi and I are having a great time with it. You're going to hear more about it partway through this episode, but also be sure to check the show notes because there's a giveaway going on right now for Wonder Crate. You're going to have to look at my Instagram feed, but all those details will be in the show notes, so be sure to hop over and check that out. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to let you listen in as Sandra Peoples and I talk about supporting our friends who have special needs kids, and we're going to learn a lot and be inspired, and I hope this is a life-changing episode. Hey, Sandra, thanks so much for joining us on the Boy Mom Podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Oh, for sure. As I was preparing to have this conversation, I was thinking, we go back quite a few years, I think. Did we meet through the MOB Society, Mother of Boys Society, back a few years ago?
We did. And doesn't it seem like in blogging years, it goes back, like where dog years, 1 year
Yeah.
equals 7 for them. In blogging years, it seems
Yes.
similar, like way back when we all
Way
first
back.
started.
Right. And it's like, I remember you. I remember reading your writing and being so encouraged and just loving your heart. And now I've been catching up more on the work you've been doing, and I just adore you. So before we go on, would you just introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do, about your family, and just a little about yourself?
Sure. Well, my husband and I have been married. It'll be 17 years this year. And we have two boys who are 14 and 12. And we live outside of Houston, Texas, where my husband is a pastor. And so, like you, we have similar warm weather right
Mhm.
now, and I'm heading to the beach tomorrow. So I love this spring time of year before it gets too hot for us to be outside. My boys are David is 14 and James is 12, and James is diagnosed with what we now call level 3 autism. The levels are kind of new just in the last few years. And so, what it means for him is that he's functionally nonverbal. And so, there's some words that he can say, but he can't have a conversation, like a back and forth conversation. And
Okay.
so, he needs a lot of accommodations and help and support. And so we rally around him and help him the best we can with therapies and programs in school. And then because my husband is a pastor, we are very passionate about inclusion in churches, which, a lot of families don't think about the fact that 20% of the US population has a disability, but not all churches are equipped to welcome them. And so that's part of what I do now is help churches welcome families like mine. And so it's a real blessing to me to be able to give back and kind of lead the way, help churches, and then encourage families to connect with a church.
Wow. I love that so much. I know that my brother has a son with muscular dystrophy, and just, walking through life, seeing through their eyes just how many places, from parks to public
Yeah,
places, are not prepared for disabilities in general. And so to think about the church, you're like, oh, wow, that's a whole nother thing. So
yeah,
really beautiful. Well, I'm excited to talk about this because I have a number of friends who have children with autism, and I know, like you said, I'm not totally familiar with the levels, but this can look different for different families. But my heart really is to learn more about supporting, about being a part of people's lives who have special needs. And I think that it's been a few years, but I wrote a blog post a few years ago on this topic because I think so often we get awkward. We want
yeah.
to care, we want to be involved, and yet we, just out of our humanity, we don't know the best way to do it. So I would love to have you share with us some of the things we can do, those of us who don't have special needs kids. And I always joke, we all have special needs kids, right? I mean, they're
Yeah.
different, but for those of us that don't have kids with a diagnosis like autism, can you walk us through some of the things you would recommend to us families who want to support and encourage and have friendships with families who are dealing with things we're not familiar with?
Yeah. Well, I do want to say just how much I appreciate your heart on this. And those who are listening today, the first step is just that desire to want to reach out and to want to be a good friend. And I can feel that when I'm talking to a friend. And so I don't want people to be afraid of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing and to let that paralyze them from doing anything.
Right.
Sometimes we're like, well, I don't know what to say or I don't know how to help. And so I'm just going to not do anything. And so hopefully the first message that you hear from our conversation today is anything is helpful, and that a parent like me will understand your heart and your desire. And so even if like even if we were talking about the terms of the different levels of autism,
Oh,
I don't
sure.
expect everybody to know
Yeah.
the language that I speak when I'm talking about that. And so I don't want anybody to feel too much pressure,
Right.
and just to know, man, we see your heart and we appreciate that so much, and just that desire to be a good friend really means a lot to us. And so that is a great place to start building that foundation.
good to know. That's encouraging.
Yeah. So, and there was a novel that I read recently, and there's two characters in it, and one of the characters has a child with autism, and this was in the 70s, and so it was a little new to everybody, and the friend comes in and is afraid of the child, and the mom says, "I can tell that you're afraid of my son, and I want you to leave my house and never come back." And I thought that is a very
Yeah,
honest portrayal of of
yeah,
the tension that can exist, because
sure.
especially when a child is young or you're just getting a diagnosis, you're scared yourself, and you see that fear reflected in somebody else, and your biggest fear is that you and your child will be rejected, that you'll be shut out of friendships, and that people will move on and you'll be left behind. And so when I read that, I thought, oh, I see that. Like, I can see how that would be true. But our task, especially as Christ followers, is to keep showing up and to keep putting effort into those relationships and to just keep showing how much we desire to be part of somebody else's life. And so I'll share a few practical ways that families can continue to show up, and kind of weave that in with some of the challenges that we face, especially as our kids get older. One of those challenges is James's age is so different from his stage of life. And so he, even as a 12-year-old, is very much like a toddler.
Right.
And so my friends are starting to, we're in our 40s now, and all of our kids are getting into those teenage years. And yet, when they invite us over, I still have to keep my eyes on James like he's a 3-year-old and not like he's a 12-year-old. And so I can't just leave, the boys in the room to play Xbox together or something like
Right.
that. And so one way that friends really minister to me and encourage me is just to kind of say, "Hey, well, let's have our conversation in here where we can keep our eyes on James together." And they don't make me feel like that is an inconvenience to them, or that I'm somehow disrupting the plan that they have for our time together. It's just they just kind of have to see me as in a different parenting stage than they are, and just kind of accommodate that. And so that's been a real gift when friends have just understood, okay,
Yep.
well, we can't take our eyes off. She's
Right.
not comfortable, and that's me. I get a little nervous, especially we go new places, and he doesn't know that, and so I have to keep my eyes on him. And so one thing friends do is just really be accommodating and understanding when um, the
Yeah.
conversation moves from room to room,
Right.
because
No, I
it's
love that.
moving.
And don't wait for you to have to ask for it. Maybe kind of anticipate that and say, would it be best if we just, went wherever he is and follow
Yeah.
him? So that's really great.
Yeah. And for us, as I'm building these friendships, really it's easier for me to have people at our house than it is for us to go to somebody else's house. And so we try to be very hospitable, and just because James is more comfortable here than he is anywhere else. And so kind of his toys are here and his space is here. Um, and so if somebody says, "Hey, you want to, do you and the boys want to come over and do something?" I'd say, "Well, I'd love to, but do you mind you and your kids coming over here?" And just kind of letting us stay in our space. And so even being flexible on where we hang out can be a real
Yeah.
gift to me, to just kind of say the what's most important is the time together. And so where that happens isn't as important as the time.
I love that. That's super good. And I
Yeah.
know for my nephew with muscular dystrophy, he's, probably has a bit of autism. We're not sure because he's, mentally delayed and they're not sure everything that they're dealing with. But one thing that's been neat for us is when my youngest son, was in his early, 5, 6, 7 years old, he really did well with his older cousin because they were at the same stage developmentally. So it was fun for
Yeah.
the little guy to play some Legos and
Yeah.
to sit with him, and he didn't mind a bit. So I think even bringing in some of the younger kids to just play with him probably is helpful too.
Yeah, that is great. And not to be too caught up in ages or
Exactly. Right. Because they're
interests, to
not
just
thinking
say,
about it.
No, just hey, we enjoy. And really what's also interesting is the more mature our kids get, so I'm talking like 16, 18,
Yep.
20 even, they're ready to they're comfortable enough with their own selves to even play those little kid games again, with somebody like my son who is still interested in that. And so they go through these stages of playing that way when they're young, but even when they're older, they're like, oh, I can put my desires aside and be a
Yes.
good friend to this child or this teenager, and,
Yes.
and we can hang out and have fun too.
Oh, I love that you're saying that. I've seen that in my own kids. I know my 18-year-old Jonah is my nephew's favorite. He just loves him.
Oh,
And I think it's because he does that. And yet the truth is, I think most of our kids at that age, they actually enjoy playing some of those little kid games
yeah,
still.
they
So it's
do.
almost like an excuse to get out the Legos or to do the things that they used to do and maybe felt pressure to move on. So I think that's a win-win.
Yeah, it is so sweet. It's sweet for us to see as
It
moms to
is.
say
Oh,
these connections. And I hear from, if you talk to a therapist or a special ed teacher or somebody like that and you say, "What made you go into this field?" It's almost always because they had a cousin or they had a close family friend with a disability, and they noticed that connection even when they were teenagers. And so anytime I see that, I certainly want to encourage that, because
mm.
you don't even know where that could lead to as a profession or a calling on their lives.
I agree so much. I see my nephew's here in Hawaii visiting and he goes to church with us, he always wants to sit next to Jonah and he'll always hold his hand. And my
Oh,
heart just melts because I think, you know what? We're getting more out of this than he is. This is just so beautiful. And that's why I look at someone like you and I think God just has, a special blessing on your life that you get to raise a special needs son. And maybe this is a good time. I believe you were raised with a sibling who had Down syndrome. Is that right? Maybe you can kind of
yes.
speak into that and how that's helped prepare you for the journey you're on now.
Yes, my big sister has Down syndrome, and we are just 14 months apart.
Wow.
So we we really did everything together. We started school together. We were in school every year together, and that brings challenges and
Yeah.
blessings, just like everything. Especially in the kind of preteen years, those can be the most challenging for siblings because they're trying so hard to blend in, and then the
Yeah.
sibling kind of makes them stand out. And so
Right.
now, with the perspective that I have as an adult, I can look back easily and see all the ways that being her sister made me who I am, and really
Right.
molded my personality and the way that God is using me even now.
Mm.
So, when James first got diagnosed, it was a little challenging for me because I felt like I had already lived that life, and that I had
Yeah.
already paid my dues in a
Mm.
way. And so
Absolutely.
I thought, I know the challenges that this is going to bring in a very unique way than just any mom who's getting a diagnosis, because I had lived it as a sibling. But I also had the foresight to know all the blessings that it would bring,
Yeah.
and how
Yeah.
even the things that I would learn about God that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. And I tend to be a little bit of a perfectionist and be a little black and white on things. And so I often like to kind of say, well, the biggest gift God could give a perfectionist like me is a child who can't meet those
Oh,
expectations that I have or that anybody else has. And
right.
so if I can look on him with such unconditional love, it just reminds me so much of the unconditional love that our Father has for us.
Oh yeah. That is awesome. And so growing up, was it just the two of you or were there other siblings?
No, we have a younger sister, and she's 5 years younger than I am, and then 6 years younger than Sybil. And so, I mean, your boys are a little spread out from oldest to
Uh-huh.
youngest, and so,
Yes, yes.
it was. I went to college when Sarah was still in junior high, and so
Sure.
then Sarah got to have these experiences with Sybil, because you get
Right.
pretty close to your siblings' ability
Yes.
level, with a disability. And so Sarah kind of caught up with Sybil, and then they had fun together. And in most well, in all states now, but it was newer then. A person with disabilities gets to go to high school until the year they turn 21. And so Sarah and Sybil went to high school together because Sybil got to go for those extra years. So she had very similar experiences to what I had. We just have super different personalities and reacted to it, which is we're still living those stories out now as adults, and it's really interesting to see.
Oh, so interesting. And I think too, now that you have two sons, so your experience being the sibling to Sybil, even though you had another sibling, she was quite a bit younger. I'm sure that this gives you a special sensitivity and understanding of how your older son feels growing up with his brother. Is that something that you can speak into a little bit from the sibling perspective?
Yes, it and that's another gift of God's grace in my life, that I can see David, especially now when he's 14, he's in what I think is one of the hardest stages of being a sibling, just those early teen years, and you're trying to figure out who you are, and then trying to figure out how this sibling influences who you are. I mean, just even if you hear somebody teasing or making fun of somebody with a disability, you as the sibling have to decide, am I going to stand up for, even if it's not even your sibling, just a person with, am I going to stop this teasing, or am I going to walk away and pretend like it's not happening? And so, I can see David dealing with all of that, especially right now as we are home and about to transition to the summer. It's a really challenging time for special needs families because James needs so much more of my attention, because I'm not just replacing a teacher, I'm replacing a teacher and an aide and a speech therapist and an occupational therapist. And just when he's in school, he has this whole team of people. And when he's home, it's just me when my husband's at work. And so David is a little bit left to himself, but I try to stay very aware of the signs of that and say, okay, James is going to go to bed early tonight, and let's watch that movie that you wanted to watch, or let me give you my full, if I find myself saying, just a minute, or no, I can't do that with you right now, I can say, let me give you at 7:30, you have my full attention.
Right.
And we can talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, it's very similar to raising a child when you've got a newborn or a toddler that's demanding all the time, but even that much more. And I will link to it in the show notes, but you wrote an article about the 7 phrases every special needs sibling needs to hear. I thought this was definitely something helpful just to mention. Do you want to name a couple of those phrases that every special needs sibling needs to hear? I love that.
Yeah. And I wrote it a few years ago, and what's funny is it's even more true now than it was when David was 8 or 10. And so one of those
14 is an a really important age no matter what. It's a challenging age. I think 14, 15, now that I've raised a few boys through that and to the other side, when people ask me, what's the hardest teenage year, I say 14, 15. That's my thing.
Man, I believe that. Yeah. And so one of them I mentioned earlier is that you have my full attention. That's an important one. One of them is just saying thank you. I mean, it's, even as moms, sometimes we want to hear that thank you. And so I try to be on the lookout for very specific ways, either that David is helping his brother, or he's blessing us as a family, or he's got a sensitive heart toward me and my needs and my moods, even as his mom. And so I say, hey, thank you for being patient when it took James a long time to find his shoes, or thank you for going to the place where he wants to eat, even though I know it's not the place that you want to eat. I mean, just that kind of, I see you.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's a really good one. And I think another one that parents may struggle to say is I don't know. We think as parents we have to have all the answers. And this is especially true when our kids are little. And I remember asking my mom questions like, why did God give my sister Down syndrome? Or why did God give me a sister who had Down syndrome? And sometimes my mom would say, I don't know. And that was so freeing because it felt to me like, okay, I don't have to have all the answers
Yeah.
and there may not be all the answers available, and let's figure this out together. And so my mom would say, well, why do you think God gave you a sister with Down syndrome? And I said, well, it really helps me watch out for the underdog. It really helps me be more sensitive to the people around me. It helps me be more patient. And this is
I love that.
determined by the age of the child that you're
Right.
talking to. And
Right.
so, but for my mom to just help guide me through that instead of just saying, oh, well, God had a reason and just leaving it at
Right.
that, then walking me through that by admitting, oh, I don't know, let's figure this out together. That was a huge help for me.
Yes, and forces you to kind of look for all the blessings in it too and discover them for yourself.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Wow.
it just anything that sparks those conversations and can get that going, but a lot of it is just being seen and being appreciated and feeling like they're contributing to the family in important ways too. Boys, they like to have a purpose. They like to be empowered. And so there's even sometimes now I'll say to David, buddy, you're going to make such a good dad, or you're going to be such a good husband because I see you exhibiting these qualities in our family now, and God is going to grow those in you. And man, you're going to be such a blessing to your wife and to your kids. And
Yeah.
that just, I can see that,
Yes.
what that does to our boys
Yep.
when we
Mhm.
give them a purpose and thinking to their future and what God will be doing in their
Yes.
hearts.
Speaking life. I love that. And I think that's so key for all kids, but especially those that, yes, are probably quietly doing a lot more than most of our boys.
Yeah.
So that's super special. Any other phrases you can share?
Yeah, one of the things I think that's really important, sometimes when we have a child who struggles so much, we celebrate little things, and we forget to keep celebrating things in the lives of our typical kids. Like for a long time, we were trying to teach James whether to answer yes or no questions, because that's huge, the ability to be
Yes.
able to do that. And I remember David kind of sitting there saying, well, gosh, I could answer yes or no questions when I,
Mhm.
like you just,
Yeah.
because here we are celebrating that at dinner every night and,
Right.
and calling the grandparents and doing all of that. And so
Yeah.
even just that celebrating of little things in their lives, like I remember with the yes or no thing, I remember David remembering to say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am when it was appropriate. And I was like, okay, see, yay, you're doing
Right.
that too. And so
Yes.
just that being on the lookout for praising them for even things that normally you would just assume would be fine, but when one child is getting so much
Sure.
attention and so much
Oh,
praise, the other one can feel a little bit neglected. And so making that a little more even by being on the lookout for things that we could praise him for.
hey friends, I'm just hopping in briefly to tell you about this episode's sponsor and about a giveaway. So this episode's sponsor is WonderCrate. WonderCrate is a subscription box that introduces kids to inspirational role models, which, if you know me at all, you know I'm all about, sparks curiosity, and connects kids to their own possibilities. Each monthly kit comes with a book and fun hands-on activities to educate, entertain, and empower. Choose your series from innovators, activists, artists, and the newest edition, which Levi's excited about, sports heroes, and choose your age range 5 to 7 or 8 to 11. Who they see shows them who they can be. Subscribe at WonderCrateKids.com and use coupon code BOYMOM to get 20% off any subscription. Now, be sure to go to my show notes where you can see a photo of Levi working on his first Wonder Crate. We had such a great time learning about Amelia Earhart. And while I read this book, which was super well written with all kinds of great facts, he was painting and putting together a wooden airplane. And then we had this blow up globe where we could track where she flew and where he's been, other activities as well. He didn't even realize he was learning. He really enjoyed it. And I can't imagine a better time than now, when most of us are still home most of the time, to be learning and doing these hands-on activities. So I'm a big fan. I think you will be too. And WonderCrate wants to give one of you a free monthly subscription. We're going to do that over in my Instagram feed. So this week, be sure to go to at Monica Swanson _ and you'll see a post about Wonder Crate. Be sure to enter over there, and one of you will win a month of a Wonder Crate subscription. All right, now we'll get back to the show. Hope you enjoy.
This makes me think now, since we're talking about, other families and friends we might have, for those of us who have, like I do, my sons have friends who have a sibling who has a special need. Is there anything you would recommend we kind of talk to our own kids about that friendship, ways that they might, maybe take time to check in or be a better friend to their friend, knowing what they, that they're carrying a little heavier load at home, or that's a place where they might have things to talk about that my sons don't necessarily relate to. Is there anything you'd say to that?
Yeah, and I do love that question, because the number one prayer I have in David's life is for friendship, because I feel like I'm raising two only children. You know what I mean? And so David and James, as much as they love each other, will never have a typical sibling relationship. And so David can look at his friends and say, man, I wish I had a brother I could fight with, even, or anything like that. And so the families who draw him in and who include him are such a blessing to us, even if it's something like we can't go to the movie as a family. And so if there's a new movie out that all the boys his age want to see, if a family calls him up and says, hey, David, do you want to come with us? That's a huge blessing.
Sure.
Because for us to try to manage, okay, which one of us is going to stay home and which one is going to take David, and how's that going to work around all of our schedules? And so just being aware that if your boys enjoy it, maybe there's one more you could add to the mix. A boy like mine who would love to tag along on something. And I know, especially in big families, when they're young, you think, oh, I don't know if I could handle one more kid. But for a kid like mine, who's very much an only child, they would love to tag along. I mean, they would love to have tater tots and corn dogs for dinner at your house, or just anything that goes along with that, because they, not in a jealousy way, but just they think, man, that house looks like a lot of fun, and I'd like to be in the mix of all that noise and all that fun. And so the families that have blessed us the most have just kind of been on the lookout for ways that they can include David. And David has good friends. I hear them talking, and they know James, and they're sensitive to what David might be feeling. Like I heard him talking the other day about one of his friends kind of complaining about another sibling, and David was like, yeah, but you guys get to play Xbox together, or you guys get to do these things together. And so it's a little bit of teaching each other, I think even that David can say, man, the things that you're complaining about are really blessings in some ways. And so I love that it seems to be both ways, that they can encourage each other.
Yes. Oh, that's huge. That's really, really important.
Yeah, they can be such a huge blessing to families, and, not making David feel like his brother is too different, or that they are not going to be friends with him because they have to hang around with his brother in any way, but they just come in. And that's part of why being friends at church is so important, because you get to see all the family members when you are at church, and so they get to know James, and it's more reciprocal even than it is in a school setting. So that's been a real blessing.
Oh, I love that. I know here during this quarantine period that I said to my boys, I started to feel convicted, because I said, our family isn't really struggling too much through this because we already homeschool. And in Hawaii, the boys have been able to surf throughout this. And really, that's the main thing they do. Yeah. And they have each other to play with. But I really felt convicted at one point and said, listen, we may be doing fine, but there's a lot of people out there who aren't, whether it's because they're struggling, without work, or because they're just lonely, whether they're elderly, or maybe they're just really scared right now. I said, so I want everyone to just stop what you're doing and think of somebody this week that we as a family can reach out to, whether it's we do a Zoom call with someone we even don't talk to that often, but we know they're sitting home alone, or whether we can bring some food to somebody. Like, let's come up with some creative way because I do think that in the busyness of life, and again, I don't blame anyone because I'm guilty too, and there's grace. But I love what you shared about just looking for somebody to invite to the movies even. I mean, that is not hard. It
Yeah.
just takes that moment of, okay, we're doing fine. Who's not doing fine? Who
Yeah.
could this really bless? And then usually you end up at least as blessed as they do by including or reaching out to somebody else. So I think that's just a lesson for all of us in wherever we are and whoever's around us.
Yeah, I know. I love that idea of you just keep building a bigger table, right? Like we have so much to share. Who else
Yes.
can we bring in
Yes.
that's in need? And that's not, I mean, that's just the need of friendship. That's not
Mhm.
a huge, you're not even having to make huge concessions for somebody
No,
else, but just kind of
no.
saying, this person could use a friend, or this person could use an hour over here while like if I'm taking James to a therapy appointment, it's a huge gift for somebody to say, well, hey, can David come hang out here while you are running James around?
Yes.
Or David is really into theater. That's
Okay.
his favorite thing to do. And he is a good actor, and so he does community theater, and he does it through the school. And so even for a friend to say, hey, can we bring David home from rehearsal, is a blessing to our whole family, because then I don't have to get James out of bed, and I don't have to disrupt his routine. And so that's just and I have to get better as a special needs mom to say, hey, do you mind, since y'all are coming right by our house, do you mind bringing David home? And so it works both ways. It's me being
Yes.
honest about what
Mhm.
our needs are, when I would rather just pretend like I have it all together and am totally sufficient in everything. But that doesn't
Well, that's
grow
a good
friendship.
reminder. Yeah, and that's such a good reminder because I know somebody listening has a special needs kid and maybe they tend to try to do it all. And I
Yeah.
think those of us, like myself, if I have a friend call and ask for some help, I love to help. It's
Yeah.
just half the time I think we're all just busy doing our thing. And so if you can let people know what your needs are, I think most of the time we're going to be really happy to be able to fill a need.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And then you also talk a bit about self-care for the moms. And so this is where I want you to speak to some of the moms out there and tell us as a friend how we could best encourage, bless, what can we do for you who are bringing up these kids?
Um, that is such a great and sensitive question. One of the things, we all struggle with decision fatigue, but I think special needs parents struggle with it even more. Like if you think you get dressed each morning and when you have a toddler, you're getting that toddler dress, but I'm still getting James dressed at 12 years
Oh,
old, and those kind of things. And so if
they
as a
won't.
parent, as a friend, if you reached out and said, like if you just called me and said, hey, what can I do to help you this week? I have no idea what to say.
I
Like I'm just
that makes sense.
paralyzed by
Yeah,
all of the
where do I
options.
start?
But if you said, hey, we're going to get pizza on Thursday night. Can we bring a pizza by your house? So
My
part of
goodness.
that, the gift is you're making part of that decision for me.
Yes.
So you're not
Ah,
increasing my decision fatigue. And this works for if a husband has just had a surgery, or somebody's
sure.
taking care of a sick parent. I mean, this has 100 applications, but
I agree.
just that helping me decrease the decision fatigue that I feel, by being very specific in the help that you offer, instead of, well, I want to help, just let me know. Let me know if you need anything. Okay,
Oh
well,
my
I'm
goodness, that
never.
is huge. Yes,
Yeah,
I'm totally getting what you're saying because, and I think sometimes we, on this side of things, hesitate to do that because we don't want to be pushy or assume that you even like pizza. Like, but
yeah,
I think when we're just take that step and do it anyway, that's just kind of breaks down that wall. I think it builds a friendship. It makes you feel that much more like it's somebody that you can trust to do that with. So I love that.
yeah. And it really, I mean, if they say no to pizza this week, then you try something else in a couple more weeks, and
Yeah.
just keep coming at, hey, I just read this great book. I think you would like it. Can I bring it by? Can I drop it off? Just anything that helps them feel seen and loved
Yes.
and appreciated, but that doesn't add to their mental load that they're
Right.
already carrying.
That's so encouraging to me. We have a good friend here whose wife recently passed away from cancer, and he actually has a special needs adult daughter who he cares for. And so you're giving me lots of good ideas because I'm always thinking, okay, I've brought a meal, brought a couple meals, and then I'm like, okay, what else can I do? So I'll send one of my boys down to just show up at his doorstep and say, is there some yard work I can do? Or
Yeah,
when I'm at Costco, I'm like, okay, what can I get you? Not do you need anything, but what's one
right.
thing I can bring you?
Yeah, that's
So
perfect.
yeah, you're getting my creative juices flowing here.
Good.
I love it. Well, is there anything else before we wrap up that comes to your mind that's just something that to add to that list of ways we can be a better friend to our friends who have special needs kids?
No, I think a lot of it is just to keep trying. And especially if you have a friend whose child was recently diagnosed, they're going through grief, at some level. And so we need to just, as friends, keep showing up, even if that's not reciprocated right away. Don't be discouraged by that and just keep trying, be understanding of that. And there are times, I mean, my schedule is fuller because I have therapy appointments and all these things going on. So sometimes I have to say no to invitations to come hang out. That doesn't mean that I don't want to and that I might not be
Right.
able to in 2 weeks. And so just don't, as a friend, try to keep showing up and keep coming up with ideas and try to sit with them in whatever they're going through and bring them hope. And one of the best things that friends did for me was I'm not going to leave you because your
Mm.
child has a diagnosis. We are still going to be in your lives. We're still going to be friends with David and with James and with you. And so just that, because everything felt like it was changing, I needed some consistency. And those friends really provided that. And it was a huge gift.
Wow, that is beautiful. I love that. Well, there's a whole lot more I'd love to talk to you about because I think that you have so much to offer in the way of just experience and wisdom and insight into all of this. So I would love to have you back on. And in fact, I'd like to invite the listeners who might be raising a child with special needs to be sure to go to the comments in our show notes and leave any questions you would have for Sandra, who has a son with autism, was raised with a sister with Down syndrome, but also just works within the special needs community. So if you could leave a question or your biggest challenge in raising your own child with special needs, or maybe it has to do with a friend or somebody else in your life, I'd love to have you come back on, Sandra, and maybe we can answer some of the questions people leave. Does that sound like a good idea?
Yes,
Put you
I
on the
would love
spot
that.
right here.
No, I love that.
Can't say no. I would appreciate that so much. And then before we wrap up, I would love to throw out a couple just wrap up questions for you. Are you ready for that?
I'm ready.
Awesome. Well, we just like to start with some boy mom essential that you cannot imagine going a day or a week without as you're raising your two boys.
Um, okay, something that's essential. I'm going to say a stain remover. I think that good lawn, finding something that gets out all the stains that the boys get into, and that was when they were little, and it's still now in these preteen years, they're still coming home with dirt
Yep.
or grass or, they're
Totally.
smellier than they were even when they
Uh-huh.
were little. So I love
And
having a good
do you
stain
have one that
remover.
you would recommend? Because OxyClean is my go-to, but I'm not sure it always does the job. Anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I soak my boys' stuff in Biz. Um,
Oh,
and it's what my
old-fashioned, right?
mom used
Yeah.
and so, like I have a stain stick that I use. I think it's
Uh-huh.
Shout, but for the big stuff, it's like soaking in Biz overnight kind of
Hey,
thing. So,
well, good to know. Thank you. I can always
yeah.
use laundry tips. Okay. Now, also with your two boys, is there a time where you had that moment where you just thought, I'm raising boys. I am a boy mom. Anything they dragged in, said, or did that comes to mind?
Well, one thing that comes to mind when the boys were younger, we had some friends over and they had two boys, and then we had other friends over who didn't have any kids. And at one point during our little cookout, all 4 of the boys were completely naked or partially naked. And I just remember the face of the friend who didn't have kids yet, and she just couldn't believe it. And we were like, no, this is, they were 3 and 5 and 4 and 6, the 4 boys in between them. And I was like, you just, this is just part of it. Like at one point, my friend was like, don't pee on your brother, and it was like things you never thought you would say.
Right.
That
she was silently praying for daughters.
yeah, but I did feel like we were giving her a very accurate portrayal of, because I was raised with sisters, like I said, and so all of that was very new to me, and I thought, nope, this is real life.
Way to embrace it. I love that. That's so good. Okay, and then if you could leave everybody with maybe a little piece of wisdom, something that you might say now to a younger Sandra, if you could speak to yourself with newborn babies, little boys.
And and this relates to specifically even being James's mom, and that's, I think I say trust your gut. I mean, I think that God speaks to us in lots of different ways, and one of that is our mother's intuition. And so good things and hard things, I kept trying to talk myself out of there being something going on with James. I'm like, oh, well, no, he's just a slow talker. But my gut kept telling me, you need to investigate this more. You need to tell a professional. And that's still true. Even at this age, I kind of think, how is my spirit unsettled? And how is God speaking to me, giving me some intuition? And so there's so many ways we can tell ourselves, oh, you're just being dramatic, or oh, you're overreacting. And we have to sometimes quiet those voices and say, no, God gave me this personality for a reason, and God gave me these boys for a reason, and I have to trust my intuition on this and figure out what's going on. Even if we just, David, if he's a little sullen for a day or two, I have to trust my intuition and say, okay, he needs me in a bigger way, and I need to pry a little bit and figure out what's going on. And so listening to your gut, whatever your heart or your gut or whatever you kind of see as your center, that God speaks through.
I totally agree. I love to, the times when I can get really quiet and still in my time with the Lord and just ask, kind of go through each of the kids when I just think about them and lay them before him and say, is there anything? And sometimes you just get that little nudge, and when you follow it, pretty much always right. So great advice. I love that. Okay, well, I have so enjoyed talking to you, and I just feel really encouraged and like I want to sit down with my family and have a good chat about some of the people in our lives and how we could be better friends. So I want to thank you for encouraging us and for your grace in understanding, that we're not all great at this, but assuming the best out of us. So thank you, Sandra. Yeah. And I'm going to link in show notes to everywhere people can find you and your awesome book and just, all the places. But before we wrap up, can you just tell people if they want to hop online and track you down right now where they might find you?
Sure. The home base is sandrapeoples.com, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And so those are the best places. I have a podcast that comes out each week. It focuses on self-care for caregivers, and it's just a real short, practical thing. We talked about decision fatigue. There's a whole episode on how that affects special needs parents like me. And so that's a helpful spot. But, Instagram is a fun place to hang out and really get to know people because you're seeing into their daily lives. And so that may be a great place to start and make a connection.
Terrific. Well, we'll link to you everywhere. And just want to thank you again for your time and hope to have you back.
Sure. Thank you.
All right, friends, I hope you enjoyed that conversation, and I hope you'll spread the word about this episode with your friends, those who have special needs kids and those who don't. I think this is an important one for all of us. Again, be sure to go to show notes at monicaswanson.com/podcast, and this is episode number 56, and you can find out more about entering to win the free subscription box. Use that coupon code to get your Wonder Crate box at 20% off, and anything else that we talk about is linked to to in the show notes. Okay, guys, hang in there with everything. Enjoy the rest of your week. And until next time, aloha.